Court is now in session. I'm the Supreme Court Justice of the comment section, but you can call me the Supreme or Judge Rebble Pebble. You may all take several seats now. Now, I've been silently judging people in the comment section for years. Tucked safely away in the confines of my mother's basement, I've been passing my judgment on internet personalities since I was a kid. I started my career as a social media prosecutor in the comment section. All throughout the metaverse, I prosecuted minor internet offenses in the comment section, from content creators with extremely long intro music to the tone deaf apology videos from the makeup community. I've done it all. Some of my high profile cases include Bill O'Reilly versus the teleprompter guy. Remember, in May 2008, an outtake of Bill O'Reilly having a conniption fit in a behind the scenes take from the 90s show Inside Edition went viral. A quick search of Bill O'Reilly Goes Nuts on YouTube will refresh your memory of his infamous display of unprofessionalism in the workplace. Now, in my capacity as a defense attorney, I successfully represented the Grape Lady from the Grape Lady Falls debacle, where a devastating video of news reporter Melissa Sander surfaced online. The video showed the moment she fell out of a grape bucket and smashed her face in the ground. Thanks to my work on the case, she has since become an internet legend instead of a social media embarrassment, like Don Lemon, who said on live TV, and I quote, "Ooh, you can't shame them, you can't call them stupid, you can't call them silly. Yes, they are. The people are believing the lies on the internet instead of science. It's time to start shaming them or leave them behind. They are keeping the majority of Americans behind. You know what they get shots in nowadays? In their rear ends. They're getting shots to make it bigger. They're getting shots in their face. They don't know what's in Botox. You know how you got here to visit me in New York? You took an airplane. What is that? Science." End quote. We were troubled when we saw this video of Mr. Lemon during evidence in the trial. Never in all our combined years on the Supreme Court of the comment section bench have we seen such a reductive diatribe being presented as news, instead of the marketing scam it really was. Since when did an alleged news reporter have the authority or right to make judgments on audiences? Isn't the customer supposed to be right? And since when did viewers become acceptable damage in the carnage of the rating wars? When did the newsroom become a Baptist church pulpit, spitting, hooping, and hollering on live TV? This is just one of the reasons we are here today in this court. And with my experience in both defending clients and prosecuting comment offenders or COs, I will be rendering a fair verdict. The jurisdiction of my courts cover the metaverse as well as the Alphabet Company, aka YouTube, Twitter, and Rumble, to name a few. This live reading of my judgment centers on a case that highlights the scourge and menacing of public hypocrisy. As a community, if we want to continue convincing people to keep their trust and faith in this capitalist machine that feeds us our daily bread, then we must strive to eliminate public hypocrisy wherever and whenever we find it. Now, the number one threat to all our corporations, public systems, and institutions is hypocrisy, and my judgment will reflect the severity of the charges that have been brought forward to this court. This is a criminal case, and so I will be rendering a verdict of guilty or not guilty by the end of these proceedings. People versus corporate news media, or the CNM, also known as the commoditization of facts. That is the case that has been brought forward today. Now, everyone who has a valid citizenship to a country has certain obligations and commitments to fulfill. That is a fact. The most important of these is paying taxes. Another fact. You cannot escape taxes because even if you're unemployed or working without a permit, you will still pay taxes in the form of VAT or value added tax, VAT, whenever you spend money on items in shops. Even illegal aliens, or whatever politically correct word is being used to describe people seeking asylum from hardships in their native countries, is being used today. Even those individuals who risk their lives to find hope abroad, even they contribute to a country's wealth by providing labor at below market rates for local business owners. There have been well documented cases of mom and pop shops welcoming undocumented workers into their businesses so that they can cut down on wage costs and make more profit. While we also regularly see news reports and documentaries on huge multinational corporations who acquire cheaper intermediary goods by contracting independent companies who source the use of undocumented workers. It's a more sophisticated way of doing it, but it's all the same. It is therefore safe to say that every single person who contributes to a country's GDP or gross domestic product is a member of that society, officially or not, and that they should reap the rewards of being a member of that society, and those rewards extend into the world of the internet where these courts operate. In the 2008 economic crash, many people failed to remember, in fact, that it was the illegal trade industry that kept the economy from completely tanking. There's a lot to be said about that too. However, this is not the day for it. Essentially, we can all agree that when people contribute to an economy, they are signing a sort of social contract. Now, in this social contract, we must remember that it is implied. Now, the charges that the people brought against corporate news media, or CNM, allege that by virtue of three proxy agents, namely Rachel Madison, Tucker Carlton, and Chef Ferlucci, the corporate news media has been able to commit three counts of psychic vampirism by proxy. In addition to these charges, the people also argued a second count of psychic terrorism via televised transmission against the people. These crimes are capital offenses according to the Generic Comment Section Constitution, or GCSC, and each count carries a minimum sentence of 25 years for each count per offender. These charges are extremely serious because they threaten the foundation of the social contract that built and sustained society up until this pivotal point in history that we now find ourselves in. To give you a brief outline, the main terms of this social contract that we are all beneficiaries of are very clear and can be stated in 3 points. Number one, everyone who contributes to the economy deserves to be treated fairly and given equal opportunities, regardless of the size of the contribution or any other discriminating factor. Number two, everyone who contributes to the economy should have the freedom to say and publish whatever they want to on the internet. Number three, everybody who contributes to the economy should have full and unwavering autonomy over their own physical and mental person and be free from the fear based coercive tactics practiced by extraneous, extrinsic, or foreign legal or natural persons with the aim or result of establishing intrusive interventions on the bodies and minds of the people. The main reason why this case has been brought to my court for judgment is because a serious violation of these basic social tenets has taken place. Certain special interest groups have decided to form their own breakaway society where basic human decency has been scrapped and morals and ethics do not apply to them. These courts wouldn't be engaged in this case if those certain individuals lived out on an island far away all by themselves. But unfortunately, they insist on sucking on the minds of paying citizens, even though Jeffrey Epstein's island is available for them to use free of charge. In my judgment, I will show how they are stealing out of the economy we all contribute to, and how they don't just stop at stealing money, but they are also intent on stealing the minds of hardworking men and women everywhere. Not content with just destroying our communities, they are now mastering their arts by spreading their sickness onto the internet. And since the internet is under the jurisdiction of my courts, it was fitting for me to make a ruling on this case. This judgment I have made was reached after listening to both sides of the case. The people, represented by UK citizen Russell Brand, Romanian citizen Diana Sosaka, Switzerland citizen Nicola Grimaldi, Serbian citizen Novak Djokovic, US citizens Nicki Minaj, Kyrie Irving, Layla Ali, Jonathan Isaac, Andrew Wiggins, Bradley Beal, Kent Bazemore, Trey Burke, Dwight Howard, Kyle Kuzma, Matisse Tybul, Aaron Rodgers, Andrew Benintendi, Whit Merrifield, M.J. Melendez, Hunter Dozier, Brad Keller, Brady Singer, Michael A. Taylor, Kyle Isbell, Dylan Coleman, Cam Gallagher, U.S. environmental lawyer and author Robert F. Kennedy Jr., U.S. Senator and medical physician Rand Paul, US Senator Ron Johnson, Australian Senator Gerard Rennick, and the other 2.5 billion people in the world who, according to official statistics, have opted out of or spoken out against receiving interventional measures on their physical person through coercion. The internet exists in a democracy, so these billions of people have a right to be heard. Anything less would be tyranny. Now, the people are represented by the names I've just mentioned, while the corporate news media is represented by those three proxies who have been charged in this case: Rachel Madison, Tucker Carlton, and Chef Ferlucci. The internet exists in a democracy, so these billions of people have a right to be heard. Anything less would be tyranny, and since the public media will not give these billions of people a fair shake, they have had to come here to the Supreme Court of the Commons section for justice, because here, the due and true administration of justice is the firmest pillar of online social cohesion. This court will not allow the internet to be destroyed in the same way that corporate news media fascist insects have already destroyed our cities and communities. So, how have our cities and communities been destroyed by the corporate news media or CNM? During over 60 days of testimony, the people proved that selective news reporting was the number one method that the corporate news media, or CNM, used to undermine communities. As our beloved Karine Jean Pierre stated recently, whenever you think about something repeatedly, it is top of mind. That phrase, top of mind, doesn't just apply to things you think about, like how you're going to pay your bills this month, if you'll make it through the dark winter we're in, or when you'll leave your mother's basement. Top of mind also applies to things you see and hear around you. Originally, television was the main source of everything we would see and hear about our communities. It was always reassuring to have journalists bringing us news about our communities so that we could get a general sense of what life was like for the people around us. The work that journalists used to do was vital in building a sense of oneness and openness between strangers in the same land. And as broadcasting technology and its reach grew bigger than Toronto Mayor Rob Ford's crack cocaine habit, we began being exposed to programs from other regions, and soon we were watching news reports from different countries. Starting with the 1960s counterculture all the way up to the fall of the Wall of Berlin in the late 80s, news reporting and mainstream media was a great independent tool for solidarity amongst people all over the world. Unfortunately, as Russell Brand and many others have recently experienced, broadcasting is now a tool for division. And the reason for this division is clear. It all boils down to market segmentation. After the economic crash of 2008, there was a marked shift in the way that we got fed our news. It was as if all the journalists were fired and replaced with newsreaders. It was as if journalism as a skill was scrapped and replaced with advertising copy. After 2010, the news became the news media. Truth was commercialized and turned into a commodity to the point that today, if you want a certain truth, you can find somebody to sell it to you. Any truth you want, they have it. As one of the people's witnesses, Wumni, also known as Wumni Girl, an African living abroad, testified in earlier proceedings by saying, quote, commercialism is no coincidence. To commercialize, you compromise. The people showed in this very court evidence of exhibit after exhibit of the different kinds of truth being sold by different corporate news media companies. The simple addition of the word media to the news reporting industry indicates the commoditization of facts. This is where the people try to prove their case as it relates to the second count of the charges on the accused in regards to psychic vampirism by proxy. The charge is by proxy because the media channels are agents of nameless, faceless board members. The charge of psychic terrorism by televised transmission, which is also against the accused, comes from the coercive tactics used by the accused to elicit specific actions from the people. The news is no longer about what is happening in your community. It's no longer about inspiring you to be civic minded. No. The news is now about getting you to buy stuff, to buy ideas. News reports about research studies were no longer about your benefit, but about selling you something, as the people showed. In one news report from a corporate news media outlet, a scientist debunked the claim that processed meat could cause cancer. 10 years after that, the WHO came out with a statement in 2015 saying that processed meat was as dangerous as smoking cigarettes. So the truth was there all along, but the news media needed to please their owners. This is the problem. As we saw in court, a quick search on YouTube for the Java Discover channel, Java Discover channel, will bring up the 1 hour testimony of how news media is controlled for profit. It's a it is clear as the light of day that in those cases, the public's best interest was not being held up as an ethical standard of news reporting. You may be wondering, how is all of this allowed? Well, those of you familiar with corporate law will know that once you register a corporation, you have a legal obligation to your shareholders and your shareholders only. Yes, companies often talk about social responsibility while poisoning our waters and driving up climate change. Only a fool or a liar would believe that there wasn't an environmental impact in the way we conduct business. But we are human after all, and so we are allowed and expected to manipulate the earth to yield goods that we can sell so that we can survive. It's a lot better than the killing and pillaging our ancestors used to do in order to acquire food, goods, and essential resources. It's true. I myself would much rather pull out my Visa or MasterCard any day rather than pull out a saber sword to go pirating on the high seas with Long John Silver. But just because we can justify the impact of big business on the environment, it doesn't mean that we have to accept the same poison they put in the seas to poison our hearts and mind. But what is, but that is what has been happening. And the people presented a compelling case as to why they will no longer be poisoned for profit. An important argument that the people made during this trial focused on how the marketing and the communication industries have been weaponized against consumers for mass destruction. The people showed that it used to be that communications studies were separate from marketing studies, but now it's all the same. Publicity is now called news. How did that come about? Well, prosecutors for the people used the following example to illustrate how such a thing can happen in a supposedly free society. When an independent news channel is bought by a holding company, the news channel is now legally obligated to put financial gain ahead of civic duty. A holding company is a registered entity that is used to hold several other companies. It's useful to have a holding company because you can use it to pool resources, to finance loans, to strengthen your position on the stock market, and of course, to hide money in tax havens. We heard testimony entered into this court from President Barack Obama, who led a mission against tax havens during his terms as president, where he explained that companies consolidate because it's much easier to have one bank account for all your corrupt corporations rather than having 100 different accounts for each of them. After all, it's easier to hide money when there's only one trail to diffuse from the taxman. So, going back to our example, once a news channel is owned under a holding company, the sole purposes of that channel is purely to make a profit. Making a profit is so important, in fact, that it's protected by the same laws that govern actual human beings. Yes, corporations are legal persons. They have rights too. Sometimes those rights eclipse those of humans. That's why you've heard countless stories of CEOs being fired from running their own companies. If a CEO can't bring in a profit to a company that he or she started themselves, he can be replaced by the board members. Just look at Steve Jobs, Jerry Yang, Jack Dorsey, and even the gentleman who invented Groupon, Andrew Mason, fired from their own companies. It's clearly not about people, it's about profits. So, how exactly do news channels make profits? Well, through advertising. With profit making front and center, ethics and morals are no longer necessary considerations for corporate news media. With basic human decency out the way, the next step for the holding company, in our example, that has acquired this news media channel under its umbrella, is for it to develop an audience for the news channel. According to the people, this is where the division of communities comes in, and it's all done through the practice of market segmentation. This is where the violation of statute number 1 of the social contract comes in. Essentially, to summarize, if I have a holding company and in that holding company portfolio, I also have a tomato farm and a news media channel, then it's obvious that I will never show any bad news about my tomato farm on my news media channel. In fact, I could get sued by my own board members for sabotaging the stockholders' money by running a news story about how poisonous my tomatoes are from my tomato farm. So, even if it's true that my tomato farm is creating poisonous tomatoes, there is no incentive for my news media channel to talk about it. If people eat my tomatoes and get sick, that's not my concern. This is a loose example of how every single major news media outlet runs today. The prosecutor for the people made the point that none of the current corporate news media channels can be trusted unless they would be independently audited by the people, by individuals like those of you watching this televised judgment and who possess a healthy set of ethics and a high moral code. Now, you will never see a case like this tried in the ordinary court systems because, quite frankly, the boomer court system, or BCS for short, is full of BS. Yes, the BCS has long been infiltrated by corporate interests who have the financial resources to change and adapt rules and regulations for their own benefit. That is no secret. In a bombshell testimony by the newsreader Amy Robach and Ronan Farrow, the people were able to prove their case. In the video testimony, corporate news media reader Amy Robach states that the network she worked for quashed her interview with Virginia Roberts Guthrie, an accuser of Jeffrey Epstein and others. In the testimony, Amy is heard saying, and I quote, "I had the story for 3 years. We would not put it out on the air. First, I was asked, 'Who is Jeffrey Epstein?' No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations and threatened us a million different ways." End quote. So, if it's so easy for the corporate news media to be manipulated into silence for 3 whole years as countless more victims are victimized, and as Amy stated in her testimony, which you can find online, by the way, if those things are being hidden, then what else is being squashed? How many more people are in danger? And from whom? We will never know. This court wishes to thank Amy Robach and the outcry witness for speaking out for the people. And as shocking as this piece of evidence was to the court, it is not the most heinous charge that has pushed this case to the point of no return. No. The main reason we are here is because of the corporate news media's role during the 2020 catfish paella. During 2020, many of our loved ones succumbed to catfish paella or paella, as the Spanish say. These courts acknowledge the real and devastating servings of catfish paella that were being dished out from a small touristy market in Wuhan, China. Unfortunately, the chef behind the recipe couldn't be found to testify in my courtroom. Has a habit of that. However, Senator Rand Paul has had the pleasure of confronting Chef Ferlucci, but he is protecting his deadly dish with the help of the very same thugs who are controlling the entire menu. The fact that I have to use code words in my judgment, and the fact that you know exactly what I'm talking about, even though I'm using code words, shows exactly how much of a deep blow the fist of fear has been to our freedom of communication. It's like the stories my grandparents told me about the Red Scare of communism 70 years ago. Today, it's not the Red Scare, but the demonetization and cancellation scare. It is no secret who everyone in suburbia is really scared of today. It's not ISIS or Coney 2012. It's not black people or even immigrants. It's the advertisers. You've heard it said plenty of times, especially on this platform, that if your videos are not ad friendly, then you will basically not exist online anymore. Having an opinion online these days is like being the Vice President of the United States of America, which, according to my dear friend Selena Maya, is basically like saying if you have an opinion, the social media mafia will have you declawed, defanged, neutered, ball gagged, and sealed in an abandoned coal mine under 2 miles of human shit. Speaking your mind on the internet is a fate worse than death. That's what it means if your content is not ad friendly. Now, if your content and message is ad friendly, then you will be fine, but you will get lost in the sea of other shills. And the only problem is that being ad friendly means you have to follow the same controlled response script that everybody else does. And that's okay if you have no scruples or morals, but for the people, this growing threat of self censorship or else regime that we live under possesses a direct threat to the terms of our social contract. And once people stop holding the social contract in high regard, well, we will have utter chaos in the streets. Under the guise of market segmentation, where the news is now being tailor made for specific demographics, we are already witnessing social decay in real time as more and more niche groups rise up and threaten to burn down our cities. The echo chamber provided by all corporate news media outlets in the world has created a terroristic threat for all of us. And while it might help to sell a few consumer goods and increase engagement rates, it is not worth the mental poison that has infected our communities. During this trial, we also had expert witness testimony from a doctor, Dr. Nicholas Carderas, who showed direct evidence to support the claims earlier made by Madonna Louise Ciccone, who stated back in 2003 that media creates social disease. In his follow up study from 2022, which you can read on the New York Post website, Dr. Nicholas Carderas found that social contagions are in fact real and can be spread through the very platforms we are talking about. The title of his findings is How Social Media is Literally Making Teens Mentally Ill, published on September 17th, 2022 at nypost.com. So the people were able to prove that we are seeing a rise in social contagions or social diseases, and medical professionals like Dr. Carderas agree that they are being spread by digital media. Therefore, this court must hold these digital media outlets accountable. They are the ones who act as proxies for corporate interests. We have to acknowledge that they are not working in the best interests of our social contract. Now, during part 14 of the trial, we heard from several representatives from corporate news media and their social media platform outlets who claimed that all they did was program the algorithm to give audiences exactly what they wanted. The accused claimed to have no interest in influencing people's thoughts and beliefs about reality beyond entertainment. They suggested that if audiences believed in flat Earth, then the algorithm would give them more content of the same. The accused also claimed that if viewers enjoyed thirst traps, then the algorithm is programmed to give them more TNA. But when the people asked corporate news media who exactly is responsible for programming the algorithm itself, the court did not receive a clear or satisfactory answer. This court still wants to know who is programming the algorithm and who do they report to? What is written on the briefs that inform how the algorithm is programmed? In the regulated economic system we live in, this lack of transparency in this area is highly troubling. It stinks of antitrust violations so diabolical it's scary. And the accused's attempt to blame the end user for, quote, feeding the algorithm is a pathetic attempt to obfuscate the truth. And the truth here is that the algorithm is managed and directed to serve the interests of a tiny group of nameless, faceless people who want profit. People who do not even live in our crime riddled communities. People who don't have to face the consequences when riots break out in the streets. Because entire groups of consumers have been radicalized by targeted programming. 10 years ago, this would have been a conspiracy theory, but we have since seen evidence presented during this case that shows a clear intent by the corporate news media to disrupt society. You have to look no further than who destroyed South Africa and who destroyed 2016 American elections. Those two media and communication companies got away scot-free while our cities burned to the ground and our Capitol buildings were stormed. It is unacceptable, and my court will not stand for this. When people in the future ask, why didn't you guys do anything? The same way we asked our grandparents, why didn't you guys just stop apartheid or segregation? Why did you let it go on for a century? This televised judgment will be proof that our generation did try and do something, that we did not agree with the status quo, that our silence did not mean compliance. Earlier in my judgment, I mentioned that capitalism is an important system that feeds us and keeps us alive. I even stated that sometimes the environmental effects of capitalism are a necessary evil in order to sustain world economies and keep small communities thriving. So it was a welcome surprise for this court to hear testimony from two of the greatest capitalists of our time. Elon Musk is a great example of how capital can be used to regain control of the runaway train of shit we found ourselves in. Oprah Winfrey is another perfect example of how media can be used to feed and nourish the mind instead of rot it from the inside out. As more and more social media influencers and icons leave the established platforms where corporate news media now thrives, people will start to regain control of their shared narrative as a society. The shared narrative we used to have when we all used to know that the world was round and that sheep dewormers were not good for human consumption. Emerging platforms like the Be Real app and Rumble are shining examples of how capitalism encourages society to keep striving for freedom by simply moving somewhere else. Now, these courts are not naive to the fact that eventually, even these new entities will be infiltrated by corporate state interests as well. But then new ones will pop up and the people will move. That's our true freedom in all of this. This time, under the wage slavery we live in, at least we can choose our master. And we have the choice to say no. No more bullshit. It's also important to state that with all these new options the people are being presented with, it is important to look out for agents or bad actors who seek to infiltrate them and destroy them. And I'm sure you all know what I'm alluding to there. So it is the judgment of this court that the corporate news media has breached all three contract terms and conditions against the people. The people have more than sufficiently proven their case against corporate news media beyond a shadow of a doubt. And it is this court's judgment that if corporate news media is not punished to the fullest extent of the social internet law, our future is at stake. On count one of psychic vampirism by proxy in the second degree, we find Rachel Madison guilty. On the same count of psychic vampirism by proxy in the second degree, we find Tucker Carlton guilty. And on the same count of psychic vampirism by proxy in the second degree, we find Chef Ferlucci guilty. On count two of psychic terrorism via televised transmission in the first degree, we find all three accused guilty, guilty, guilty. And on an additional count of collusion and profiteering, we find Chef Ferlucci guilty for cooking up his tainted catfish paella and then profiting from it for the past 3 years. You should all be ashamed of yourself. The complex post-traumatic stress disorders that these mouthpieces posing as journalists have inflicted on the people is staggering. If it were not for the 2.5 billion people represented in this court, we wouldn't have any inkling of just how deep this media rot goes. This court sends its express thanks for the bravery that these community members have shown during a time when character assassination operations are commonplace. I, the Supreme Court Justice, Judge Rebble Pebble of the Common Section, truly value all your courage in defending yourselves against this unspeakable tyranny. As for the sentencing, The standard conviction under the statute is governed by the Generic Comment Section Constitution, or GCSC. Since these crimes are capital offenses, Rachel Madison, Tucker Carlton, and Chef Ferlucci, you are all therefore sentenced to 25 years on each count to run consecutively. Madison and Carlton will face 50 years without parole, and Chef Ferlucci will face 75 years without the possibility of parole. Under this ruling and sentence, people are therefore ordered by this court to have zero contact with these agents of social contagion. They are a danger to society. I am issuing a court-ordered social quarantine with immediate effect. Do not speak to these people, do not comment on their content, and do not sacrifice your eyeballs and viewing time to them. Since it was the people who brought this case forward, it shall be the people who enact this sentence. Do not troll or bully these people, as you will be breaking the laws of this court. Bullying, attacking, and trolling is completely wrong and unacceptable behavior. Silence is key. Ignore them. These people are a danger to society and must be quarantined to protect our communities and our innocent children. We need to send a strong message that our public safety is more important than that ad-friendly nonsense. A court order will be prepared shortly to deputize Russell Brand, Doctor John Campbell, Jamie Kennedy, Joey B. Toons, and a number of other content creators to enforce this writ as officers of this court. These deputized officials will have the powers of this court to monitor and report on these media degenerate convicts. That is the judgment of this court, and it is final. As citizens, you have practiced the right to speak for yourselves. You pay for that right each and every single day with your taxes. Being online is not a privilege anymore, it's a right. And your inalienable right to freedom of expression don't just disappear because you are online. Those rights are inalienable, which means that they extend to each and every single realm of your life. If the terms and conditions of those platforms are unconstitutional, then the people must work together to rally against such policies. People often say, well, why don't you just make your own platform? And this court recognizes that the people did make these platforms. It was the people whose views were leveraged against corporate investment into these platforms. If it weren't for the millions of people who decided to use these platforms every day, they wouldn't have any money to trade with, to operate with. And if the people weren't here, they would be begging you to come on in any which way. They would be offering the people an open license to say and do whatever they wanted. Remember Two Girls, One Cup? That was definitely not ad friendly content. But when they needed the people, they let them express themselves back then. But now that they have used the people to gain corporate influence and money, they are tossing the people who built them out like used rags. This court finds that completely unacceptable. And this ruling is a wake up call to say that the people are not lunatics who think that there are aliens in Area 51. The people are young, vibrant, educated consumers who support capitalism and democracy, environmental issues and social equality, and oh, yes, a little something called honest and factual news reporting, unbiased, factual. All the people want is the decommodification of facts. Facts are not subjective. The people represented by these courts will not be made to look like QAnon quacks who think people eat babies. These courts have never heard of anything more ridiculous than claims of elites eating babies. And it was proven in my courtroom that all of that nonsense is designed by corporate news media publicists to discredit the people. And as my dear friend Cecil B. DeMille once said to me, a dozen press agents working overtime can do terrible things to the human spirit. Thank you. Case closed.